Yo, 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 yo. What? Let's get it, man. Let's get it, man. All right. What do we got here today? Yeah, you don't got nothing. All right. You got assassination attempts you never heard of on famous of assassination attempts you never heard of on famous on rappers. All right, that's a tempo. That's a typo. All right. Vita Bay. All right.
Tretch. Tretch came up in East Orange, New Jersey, a place as people called Illtown. It was a tight, tough environment where everyone hustled to survive. He and his crew, Vin Rock and DJ KG, were still deep in the grind long before the big record deals came through. They were balancing music with the streets, moving weight to make ends meet, trying to stay afloat in a world where anything could flip in an instant. That environment shaped Tretch's mindset. You learned to be alert, to stay ready, because even preparation didn't always guarantee safety. Tretch would later talk about how suddenly the streets got more dangerous. It wasn't just fights and small hustles anymore. The kind of weapons showing up out there changed everything.
Probably worst times like when they shot up, when stick up kids came. And they wasn't even really coming to stick shit up. They started shooting from the corner.
One night that reality hit close to home.
Right.
Tretch and KG were caught in a street confrontation that went from tense to chaotic in seconds. Bullets tore through the night, and in the confusion, a young woman, pregnant at the time, was caught in the crossfire but thankfully survived. KG wasn't as lucky. He was grazed in the neck, narrowly escaping something much worse.
KG got skinned in the neck.
Oh wow.
Just by being outside, they shot up like pregnant girl in the car, homie boom. Luckily nobody died, but it was like a wake-up call.
For Tretch, it was the kind of moment that cuts straight through all the noise. He realized how close they were to losing everything and that surviving the game wasn't guaranteed. That near tragedy became a wake up call for the group. They had to choose keep playing with the streets or go all in on the music. The choice was clear, and they made it count. Naughty by Nature blew up, dropping hits that became instant classics. But success didn't erase the past. For Tretch, the line
Success.
between fame and danger stayed razor thin. Even as he became a
What
global
up, what
name,
up, what up,
started
Jordan Lee?
movies, and collaborated with
How you
hip
doing,
hop's
brother?
elite, the streets kept finding ways to pull him back into the chaos he thought he left behind. That chaos came calling again in the mid 90s, this time in Los Angeles, alongside his close friend, Tupac Shakur. The two were hanging out at a comedy club one night, trying to relax, but tension was already brewing from a fight that had happened days earlier between rival gangs. The club was packed with heavy hitters from both sides, and it didn't take long for things to spiral out of control. What started as a normal night quickly turned into total chaos. Without warning, people started swinging, chairs went flying, and the room erupted into a frenzy. Tretch got struck in the head as a brawl broke out, and in those seconds, instinct took over. He knew that showing off his flashy jewelry in a moment like that made him a target, so he quickly tucked it away and fought to make it out alive. He and Tupac stuck together, using whatever they could grab chairs, bottles, anything to create span in the mid 90s, this time in
Get
the
back to this. This
past.
too.
For Tretch, the line between fame and danger stayed razor thin. Even as he became a global name, started movies, and collaborated with hip hop's elite, the streets kept finding ways to pull him back into the chaos he thought he left behind. That chaos came calling again in the mid 90s, this time in Los Angeles, alongside his close friend, Tupac Shakur. The two were hanging out at a comedy club one night, trying to relax, but tension was already brewing from a fight that had happened days earlier between rival gangs. The club was packed with heavy hitters from both sides, and it didn't take long for things to spiral out of control. What started as a normal night quickly turned into total chaos. Without warning, people started swinging, chairs went flying, and the room erupted into a frenzy. Tretch got struck in the head as a brawl broke out, and in those seconds, instinct took over. He knew that showing off his flashy jewelry in a moment like that made him a target, so he quickly tucked it away and fought to make it out alive. He and Tupac stuck together, using whatever they could grab, chairs, bottles, anything to create space and push their way out. They managed to escape the club, but trouble was far from over. That fight had consequences. Word spread fast, and before long, there was talk that both Tretch and Tupac had been greenlit. In street terms, that meant anyone loyal to the opposing side had the go-ahead to take action against them on sight. It was a dangerous situation, and Tretch knew it couldn't be ignored.
I mean, we did what we had to do, but it was so, real. We had got green lit out there by the 60s. So that's a green light is like on site.
Being from New Jersey, Tretch wasn't directly tied to the LA gang world, but he had family connections in Compton, people who understood the politics and could mediate. He reached out, explaining that what happened inside the club wasn't about disrespect or crossing lines, it was about survival. Through those connections and conversations, the situation eventually cooled down, and the green light was lifted. But for Tretch, it was another
Green light
reminder that
turned
no
orange,
matter
man.
how far he climbed,
Red, yellow light,
danger
green
was
light.
never too far behind. Even years later, that mindset of caution never left him. In 2008, long after the platinum plaques and Hollywood credits, Tretch was pulled over by Newark police while driving his Hummer near the scene of a shooting. It was a tense time for the city. Violence was high and suspicion came easy. But what stood out wasn't just that he was stopped, it was what he was wearing. When the officers approached, they noticed he had on a bulletproof vest. That small detail said everything about the world Tretch came from. Be Real. Before he became the voice of West Coast hip-hop with Cypress Hill, Be Real was just another young man trying to make it out of Southgate, California, a neighborhood that was tough, unpredictable, and deeply tied to the streets. For Louis Freeze, as he was known back then, survival meant blending into an environment that was already claiming most of the people he grew up around. Born in Los Angeles and raised in Southgate, Freeze didn't find stability at home or in school. He found it in the streets. He became part of the family Swan Bloods, a set known back then as the neighborhood Family Bloods, and dove into that life with the mindset of a soldier. The name Be Real wasn't born from fame. It was a nickname he created from his old graffiti tag, Real Chill, which he adjusted to fit the blood culture. In that world, even the letters you wrote carried meaning.
I got the name Be Real through, the gangbang life.
The world he lived in was one of constant tension, where danger was an everyday thing. Be Real often talked about how his mother tried to steer him away from the life she knew too well. His father had already been shot multiple times and his brothers had faced the same fate. But as a teenager, he had that reckless confidence that made him think he'd somehow escape the cycle. He brushed off her warnings, convinced he was untouchable. It didn't take long for reality to prove otherwise. One night when he was around 17, everything changed. He and a few of his close friends, about half a dozen of them, were walking through an area near Imperial and Hoover, just looking to pick up some weed. They were deep in rival territory, but like a lot of young guys who got too comfortable in their environment, they weren't carrying anything to protect themselves. They had left their weapons just a few blocks away, assuming they'd be fine. As they walked down the street, a car rolled up and stopped right in front of them. The people inside were wearing blue, and that alone told them everything they needed to know. These weren't friends. Words were exchanged, the kind that always come before something worse, and in seconds, things spiraled. The car's passengers suddenly pulled out a gun, and chaos followed. The attack happened fast. One of Be Real's friends was hit in the arm, and the shooters thought they had done enough damage. But as they were pulling away, one last shot was fired, the one that found its way to Be Real. He didn't even realize he'd been hit until moments later. The bullet had ricocheted off a nearby wall before striking him, tearing into his side and back. The impact left him struggling to breathe, his body in shock as his friends tried to get him help.
Or he takes 4 shots on me. The 4th one ricochets off the wall. I run into it. So I could hear him tock, tock, tock. And then the 4th one catches up to me. Boom. And I caught it. That's when I collapsed because my lung had been pierced.
He was rushed to Martin Luther King Jr. Community Hospital, known at the time as Killer King. It was a dangerous mix of wounded gang members from both sides, and the tension often carried over into the hospital itself. Even there, the threat of violence was never far away. The bullet had punctured one of his lungs, collapsing it completely. Doctors weren't sure he'd ever recover full function. Through sheer willpower and days of painful exercises, he managed to rebuild his breathing, but the fragments from the bullet couldn't be removed. The hollow point round had broken into several pieces, two of which stayed lodged in his body, dangerously close to his heart and spine. The surgeons warned him that trying to take them out could leave him paralyzed or worse. To this day, he can still feel the fragments, especially when the weather turns cold.
I got hit with a 22 hollow point, still in me. Like there's a
Wow.
fragment here, and a fragment back there.
It was a near-death experience that forced him to rethink everything. His time in the hospital made him realize how fragile life was and how easily it could have all ended that night. His friends Sendog and DJ Muggs, who were already focused on music, saw the change in him. They reached out and encouraged him to channel his energy into something new. They wanted him in the studio, not in the streets. At that point, Be Real knew he couldn't keep living with one foot in each world. Staying in the gang life meant eventually losing everything: his freedom, his health, maybe even his life. He spoke with his closest friends from the neighborhood and told them he was choosing music. They respected his decision and gave him their blessing to move forward. In 1988, he made that move official. He walked away from the street life and dedicated himself fully to music. That decision didn't just change his future, it changed the sound of West Coast hip hop. Through Cypress Hill, he brought a raw, authentic voice to a generation that understood struggle, pain, and transformation. Looking back, Be Real often said that music literally saved his life. The bullet that almost killed him ended up giving him purpose. Guru. As the gifted, unlimited rhymes universal from Gang Starr, Guru earned a level of respect few could ever touch. But as often happens in that world, success didn't erase the dangers of the streets. It only made them harder to avoid. And by the late 90s, that risk would catch up to him in the most unexpected way. By January 1999, Guru was 37 years old and still at the top of his game. The year before, Gang Starr had released Moment of Truth, one of their most celebrated projects. The album wasn't just a musical milestone, it was a reflection of Guru's mind at the time. He was rapping about pressure, paranoia, and the uneasy feeling that came with being watched or hunted. He understood that fame didn't buy peace of mind, it just came with a different kind of stress. Even though he'd left much of the street hustle behind, the world around him hadn't changed. DJ Premier, his longtime partner in Gang Starr, often talked about how real the tension was during that era. It didn't matter how famous you were, if people thought you had money, you became a walking target. Premier once explained that rappers felt safer carrying protection just to get through a studio session because word traveled fast and people outside knew when you were in there making something valuable. Guru himself understood that reality. He had always been cautious, sometimes overly so. There was even a moment where he got caught at the airport trying to board a flight with a firearm in his luggage, not out of carelessness, but because he had accidentally grabbed the wrong bag after a long night of recording. It showed just how much the idea of staying protected had become second nature to him. But no amount of caution could prepare him for what happened next. One cold night in Queens, Guru was wrapping up a late recording session at a quiet studio in the Woodhaven area. It wasn't a neighborhood where you'd expect trouble, calm, residential, and far from the chaos of the inner city. But sometimes that's what makes a setup work. It wasn't random. Someone had tipped people off that Guru was there, probably with valuable jewelry and cash. The studio manager later said it felt too coordinated to be a coincidence and that the whole thing must have been planned. As Guru
Of
walked out to his
course.
Mercedes parked outside
In more words, in other words, he got back though, man. Watch your folks. Watch your wife, watch your kid. Anybody do watch your brother, watch your sister, man. Watch your uncle, watch your auntie, watch your grandma, watch your grandpa.
the studio, the calm night turned tense in an instant. A group of masked men appeared, moving with precision. Within moments, they surrounded him. The confrontation was quick but forceful. They took everything they could: jewelry, valuables worth over $10,000 in total. In the middle of the chaos, Guru was struck during the struggle, leaving him shaken and injured. It wasn't just about losing possessions, it was about the realization that all the paranoia he had poured into his lyrics had become real. The situation escalated enough that gunfire broke out near the studio, sending shockwaves through the usually quiet block. Fortunately, no one was hit, but the experience left everyone rattled. Guru was rushed to Jamaica Hospital, where doctors treated his wounds. The injuries were serious but not life-threatening, though they left visible marks that took time to heal. For Guru, the attack wasn't just a physical blow, it was an emotional one. He had always been an artist who preached about awareness, discipline, and staying above the madness, but this experience forced him to face the same harsh truth many rappers of his era confronted, that no matter how successful you became, the streets still had a way of finding you. Ironically, much of Moment of Truth had predicted moments like this. On that album, Guru rapped about trying to stay grounded, resisting violence, and protecting what he'd built. I'm ready to lose my mind, but instead I use my mind. I put down the knife and take the bullets out of my 9. And now some scandalous mother F want to take what's mine. It was almost as if he had seen it coming. The jealousy, the setup, the feeling of being watched. And now it had unfolded right in front of him. Even after cooperating with the authorities and recovering from his injuries, the memory of that night lingered. Ice-T. He called himself the OG, the original gangster. Ice-T was the kind of rapper who didn't just talk about life in the streets, he lived it. But for all his confidence and toughness, Ice-T always understood how fragile that lifestyle really was. He would often say that if rap hadn't worked out, he'd probably be dead or in jail. That almost became reality one night in the late 1980s or early 1990s when danger didn't come from the outside world, but from right inside his own home. It started off like any ordinary night, but turned into something straight out of a nightmare. The setup was as painful as it was simple: betrayal. Ice-T's friend, a rapper named Big Rich, unknowingly brought the danger in. There was a knock on the door. 3 men stood outside, pretending to be up-and-coming rappers looking for an opportunity to talk music. Big Rich, thinking none of it, let them in. That decision changed everything. The moment they stepped inside, the energy in the room shifted. What began as a friendly meetup instantly turned tense and threatening. One of the men pulled out a gun and pressed it against Big Rich's head, demanding to know who else was in the house. The other 2 quickly revealed their own weapons. It was clear these weren't amateurs or random burglars. They knew exactly what they were doing. Within seconds, the entire house was under their control. Ice-T, his daughter, and a few others were forced into the kitchen. The fear in that room was heavy, everyone aware that one wrong move could mean the end. Ice-T later said that in that moment, he fully believed they weren't walking out alive.
Dad said, how many people are back there? The other 2 cats came back. One had a machine gun, the other one had a pistol. Took us into the kitchen, and I thought we were going to be executed.
Then the intruders ordered everyone to line up against the wall. The instruction was clear and cold: turn around and face the wall. For Ice-T, that command meant something final, because once your back is turned in a situation like that, there's no defense left. You're completely at their mercy. But Ice-T didn't turn, not out of ego or recklessness, but because his daughter was there. He refused to let her see him submit like that, refused to give these men the power of watching him surrender. Instead, he dropped to one knee facing them. He was mentally preparing for the worst, even bracing himself to react if things went south. In his mind, if shots started flying, he'd rather move than stand still. It was a tense standoff, with everyone's nerves stretched thin.
You staring him in the eye with all them guns?
Well, what are you going to do? My daughter was there. I'm not going to turn my back. You know, like we used to always say, I'm not getting in the trunk, dog. I'm not getting in the trunk. So what am I going to do? I'm not going to rush them. But if they start shooting, I got them.
But something about his reaction threw the robbers off balance. Maybe they weren't expecting him to challenge them, maybe the tension was too thick, but instead of following through on their threats, they stuck to taking valuables. They grabbed money, jewelry, and other possessions, then shut off the lights and disappeared into the night. When it was all over, Ice-T was left standing in the dark, shaken but alive. Everyone in the house survived, but the emotional damage lingered. What hurt most wasn't just the fear, it was the betrayal. Later, Ice-T learned that one of the people involved in the setup was someone close to him, someone he had helped and trusted. That realization hit harder than the robbery itself. He described the pain as something deeper than anger. It was the shock of realizing loyalty doesn't always run both ways. A friend later gave him a piece of advice that stuck with him. There's no defense against betrayal. It's one of those lessons that leaves a permanent scar, and Ice-T carried that awareness into everything he did afterward. In the years that followed, he continued pushing boundaries with his music, especially when he released his controversial song Cop Killer with his band Body Count. But what that terrifying experience really taught him was that the greatest threats don't always come from enemies or police or rival crews. They can come from people standing right next to you. LL Cool J. By the time 2012 rolled around, LL was no longer just a rap icon. He had evolved into a respected Hollywood actor, playing the hardest nails special agent Sam Hanna on NCIS Los Angeles. But on one quiet summer night that same year, his toughest role wasn't on camera. It was in real life, in his own home. It was the early morning of August 22nd, 2012, when the calm of LL's Studio City mansion was shattered. Around 1 a.m., the security alarm went off, piercing through the silence of the house. LL was upstairs asleep when the noise jolted him awake. Anyone else might have grabbed the phone to call the police or waited for help to arrive, but LL Cool J wasn't anyone else. Decades of discipline and a natural instinct to protect his family kicked in immediately. Instead of hiding or hesitating, he got up, moved quickly to the dark hallways, and headed downstairs to see what was going on. Down in the kitchen, he came face to face with an unexpected intruder, a middle-aged man later identified as Jonathan Kirby. Kirby wasn't a burglar looking for an easy score. He was a 56-year-old drifter with a long criminal history, someone who had made bad choices his entire life. What happened next was quick, tense, and frightening. Kirby tried to lash out, and LL responded the only way he knew how, with control, focus, and respect. The confrontation didn't last long, but it was intense. It wasn't some flashy movie fight scene. It was a real, unpredictable moment inside LL's home. The rapper managed to restrain Kirby with his own hands and his calm under pressure. By the time the police arrived, LL Cool J was completely unhurt. The same couldn't be said for the intruder, who was subdued and waiting to be taken into custody.
My alarm went off at 1 o'clock in the morning, and not the alarm, but the delay, entry delay, and I looked, scrolled through it, family room, and I said to my wife, like, family room? I'm thinking maybe my daughters are coming in, so I stroll downstairs, and I get down there, and this guy comes out of my kitchen at me, and I detained him.
A 911 call had been made by a woman in the house,
Brother,
reportedly LL's daughter, who told the
you
operator
want
that her
to play?
father was holding the
I
suspect
need you about
downstairs.
saying nothing.
When officers showed up, they found the situation already under control. LL had done what he set out to do, protect his home and his loved ones.
I think I did what any man would do, you know, or what most men would do, which is do whatever you got to do to protect your family.
Absolutely right.
I had to do that.
Kirby, however, was in bad shape and needed medical treatment before being taken to jail. Later, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office revealed just how dangerous this man really was. He had a lengthy criminal record going back decades, including a conviction for voluntary manslaughter in Texas in the late 1980s. That meant his home invasion wasn't just another break-in, it was a potentially deadly encounter that could have ended much worse. Thanks to LL's quick action and self-control, no one in the family was hurt. Nothing in the house was stolen, and the situation was resolved before it could turn tragic. Once Kirby was released from the hospital, prosecutors officially charged him with first-degree burglary. Because of his past record, he was treated as a third-strike offender under California law, meaning he was now facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life behind bars, with a maximum sentence of 38 years to life. In the aftermath, LL Cool J stayed calm and professional, issuing a short public statement through his team. He didn't gloat or brag about what had happened. Instead, he emphasized his priorities as a father and a husband, saying his only focus that night was keeping his family safe. And he quietly returned to work, continuing to film NCIS Los Angeles as if nothing had happened. Buckshot. As the co-founder of Duck Down Music and the voice behind legendary groups like Black Moon and Boot Camp Click, Buckshot has spent over 3 decades helping define New York's gritty, lyrical identity. But in October 2024, the threats Buckshot found himself facing weren't born from any rap rivalry or industry beef. This time, the danger came from something far more ordinary, and in some ways, more dangerous: a dispute over real estate. The situation unfolded in Flatbush, Brooklyn, a neighborhood that had long shaped Buckshot's worldview. At 49, he had legally purchased a property in the area, looking to fix it up and make something positive out of it. But instead of finding an empty building ready for renovation, he discovered that the home was already being occupied, illegally. The property had become a base for squatters, and among them was one man in particular who stood out for all the wrong reasons. He was a known troublemaker around the neighborhood, a man with a long criminal history, and someone neighbors claimed had been running small-time hustles from the very property Buckshot now owned. According to reports, the squatter had a reputation as a deed thief, someone who manipulates paperwork to claim ownership of properties that don't belong to them. On top of that, the house's driveway had been used to stash what locals called ghost cars, vehicles with fake or stolen registrations. When Buckshot started the process of cleaning up the place and restoring his investment, the trouble began almost immediately. The squatter and his associates weren't willing to leave quietly. They began confronting Buckshot whenever he showed up at the property, recording him on their phones, shouting insults, and trying to push his buttons. At one point, the man began following him around, calling him a snitch and trying to provoke him into reacting.
Don't even try it.
Huh?
Don't even try it.
Don't try
You a
what?
snitch. You a snitch.
Yo, bro, listen.
You a snitch.
Bro, don't play
You
with
a
me,
snitch. Get
bro.
out of here.
Bro,
You a
don't play with me.
snitch.
Buckshot kept his cool for a while, focusing on getting control of his property back through the right channels, but the tension was building. Eventually, things boiled over. During one heated exchange, the man got in Buckshot's face again, and this time, the veteran rapper finally stood his ground. The pushback, whether a shove or just a physical step forward, was exactly what the antagonist had been waiting for. He immediately grabbed his phone, yelling into it for his friends to come through the block because, as he claimed, Buckshot had hit him. Within moments, reinforcements began arriving. Men the rapper would later describe as his attackers' cronies, clearly ready to escalate things further. What happened next was chaotic and frightening. Buckshot suddenly found himself surrounded by multiple men, some armed, and before he could process the situation, things turned physical. It wasn't a shootout, but it was an attack designed to send a message. The men struck him repeatedly, leaving him dazed and badly hurt. Witnesses said it all happened fast, and when it was over, Buckshot was left shaken and injured on the street. Soon after, videos began to surface online. The clips showed the veteran MC bruised and bleeding, calling out for an ambulance. The footage shocked fans across the world. This was one of hip-hop's most respected underground icons, a man known for his calm and thoughtful demeanor, suddenly caught in the middle of something that looked more like a clip camera designed to send a message. Things turned physical. Multiple men. Next was attacked within moments to antagonist, focusing on getting control of his property back through the right channels, but the tension was building. Eventually, things boiled over. During one heated exchange, the man got in Buckshot's face again, and this time, the veteran rapper finally stood his ground. The pushback, whether a shove or just a physical step forward, was exactly what the antagonist had been waiting for. He immediately grabbed his phone, yelling into it for his friends to come through the block because, as he claimed, Buckshot had hit him. Within moments, reinforcements began arriving. Men the rapper would later describe as his attackers' cronies, clearly ready to escalate things further. What happened next was chaotic and frightening. Buckshot suddenly found himself surrounded by multiple men, some armed, and before he could process the situation, things turned physical. It wasn't a shootout, but it was an attack designed to send a message. The men struck him repeatedly, leaving him dazed and badly hurt. Witnesses said it all happened fast, and when it was over, Buckshot was left shaken and injured on the street. Soon after, videos began to surface online. The clips showed the veteran MC bruised and bleeding, calling out for an ambulance. The footage shocked fans across the world. This was one of hip-hop's most respected underground icons, a man known for his calm and thoughtful demeanor, suddenly caught in the middle of something that looked more like a setup than a random confrontation. He was quickly taken to the hospital, where doctors confirmed he had suffered a concussion and other injuries. Physically, he would recover, but the emotional toll ran deep. Buckshot spoke out soon after the incident, expressing disbelief that something like this could happen in the same city he'd spent his entire life representing. He was deeply disturbed that an argument over property, something he had legally purchased, had spiraled into such senseless aggression. Still, Buckshot wasn't about to let fear dictate his next move. Instead of going silent or letting street intimidation win, he decided to take the proper route. He confirmed that he was cooperating fully with law enforcement and working closely with his lawyers to make sure the attackers were held accountable. He wanted justice, and while some might have tried to label him a snitch for taking legal action, Buckshot made it clear that he didn't care about those labels anymore. He'd survived too much, seen too much, to let that kind of talk stop him from doing what was right. In the days that followed, his message was firm. He wasn't backing down. He wasn't going to let a group of criminals or online noise scare him away from protecting what belonged to him. His words afterward summed up the spirit he carried throughout his career. He doesn't tolerate bullies, and he doesn't run. Method Man. In the early 90s, Staten Island was alive with energy.
Okay,
The
man,
neighborhood
man,
around
man.
160 Park Hill Avenue, which would later become legendary thanks to its appearance in the Protect Your Neck video, was the heart of that movement.
It's
It was a
Jackie,
place
ladies
where
and
aspiring
gentlemen.
rappers, dreamers, and hustlers crossed paths daily, each trying to make something out of their circumstances. Among them was Clifford Smith, better known as Method Man. On this particular day, Meth was just doing what most young men in the neighborhood did, moving through the block,
Mr.
focused on his
Jay-Z,
own routine. He was headed toward one of the
Jay-Z.
buildings, planning to buy some weed and keep it pushing. It was a normal day in Park Hill, but in neighborhoods like that, normal could flip in an instant. Across the street, another familiar face was watching the block, Robert Diggs, the man the world would later come to know as RZA. Even back then, RZA's mind was in constant motion. He was always thinking about music, business, how to rise above the chaos. To most people, he might have seemed quiet or distant, but behind that calm exterior was a sharp awareness of everything happening around him. As RZA looked over the scene, he noticed Meth heading toward the front of 160 Park Hill. He didn't know exactly why, but something about it didn't feel right. Without hesitation, he called out, "Yo, come here," he yelled across the street. To anyone else, it might have seemed like nothing, but in places like Park Hill, instinct could mean survival. Method Man paused for a second. He later admitted that if it had been anyone else calling him, he probably wouldn't have turned around. Without thinking twice, he changed direction and started crossing the street toward him. What happened next would change everything. Meth had barely reached Rez's side when the air erupted with sudden noise. A series of gunshots cracked through the quiet of the afternoon, echoing off the buildings. The shots were aimed directly at the area where Method Man had been standing just moments earlier. In the blink of an eye, what could have been a casual trip down the block turned into a near tragedy. Reza later remembered the sound vividly. It came out of nowhere, sharp and fast. One moment there were just two young men talking on the sidewalk, and the next, chaos had broken loose across the street. In the middle of that confusion, tragedy struck. One of their friends, a young man named Poppy, was hit during the gunfire. He wasn't involved in anything, he was just caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Everyone in the neighborhood knew him as a good kid, a quiet, respectful guy who stayed out of trouble. That day, he didn't make it home. For Method Man, the reality of what just happened hit hard. A few seconds difference, one missed call, and his name could have been on that list too. He knew Riz's quick instinct had saved his life. From that day on, he never forgot it. He would often talk about that moment years later, saying how that call across the street changed everything. The weight of that near miss hung heavy, especially when you think about everything that came after. If Method Man hadn't made it out of that moment, the entire course of hip hop history might have shifted. The Wu-Tang Clan, the movement that would redefine the East Coast sound, might have never come together. And even RZA himself was walking a thin line back then. Around the same time, he was fighting his own battle for freedom. In 1991, he faced serious legal trouble after being charged with assault in Ohio. He claimed self-defense, and after a long process, he was acquitted in 1993. Had things gone differently, he could have spent nearly a decade behind bars, long enough to erase the chance of Wu-Tang ever forming. Looking back, it's almost eerie how close everything came to falling apart before it even began. A few different decisions, a few seconds off, and the world might have never heard Cream or Protect Your Neck. But fate seemed to have other plans. Dr. Dre. The rise of Death Row Records, the label Dr. Dre co-founded with Suge Knight.
Now, what do y'all think about that, man? Method Man? Clifford Smith? Remember that name, huh? I say, hey, that's crazy, man. Let's
Was
get
one
it.
of the most powerful movements in
Dr.
music
Dre.
history. But behind the Platinum Records, Death Row was a
Andre
place
Young.
fueled by fear, ego, and constant conflict. For Dre, a man whose calm precision had defined an entire sound, the chaos eventually turned inward. He went from being one of the architects of that empire to one of its victims, caught in a cycle of hostility that would eventually push him to make a life-altering decision, to walk away from everything he'd built. But long before Death Row's turmoil, Dre's name had already been attached to controversy. In 1991, during his NWA era, he attended an industry party in Hollywood where an encounter with TV host Dee Barnes went terribly wrong. After she aired a segment that he didn't appreciate, Dre confronted her and attacked her in front of onlookers.
They grabbed me by my hair and started slamming me up against the wall. It's a painful and traumatic experience.
The incident was
No, man. Dr. Dre, you a woman beater, man. Come on now. Just lost respect for you, dog.
NWA era, he attended an industry party in Hollywood where an encounter with TV
Let me
host
run
Dee
that down.
Barnes went terribly wrong. After she aired a segment that he didn't appreciate, Dre confronted her and attacked her in front of onlookers.
Yeah,
They
that's
grabbed
not
me by
cool,
my
man.
hair
That ain't cool.
and
We don't
started
condone that.
slamming me up against a wall. It's a painful and traumatic experience.
The incident was ugly, and it followed him for years. Dre later pleaded no contest to assault and battery, and although he faced the legal consequences, the emotional and reputational damage lingered. Over the years, more accusations surfaced, from his former label mate Terry B to singer Michelle A, who spoke publicly about enduring abuse during their relationship. These stories painted Dre as both a musical genius and a man haunted by his temper. But as time passed, it became clear that the death row environment only amplified those extremes. The label was supposed to be revolutionary, but under Suge Knight's influence, it evolved into something far darker. The studio was no longer just a creative hub, it became a place where intimidation was part of the culture. Stories circulated
Oh,
about
that's
staff being mistreated, tempers flaring during sessions, and outsiders fearing to even step foot in the building. Dre, who had always been more about music than mayhem, grew increasingly uneasy. He saw the way things were going, the constant pressure, the paranoia, the blurring of business and street politics. At one point in the mid 1990s, a tense situation unfolded inside the studio. Suge Knight was publicly embarrassing one of his own associates, and Dre, unwilling to stand by, stepped in to defend the man. That simple act of standing up for someone else turned into a spark. Words were exchanged, pride got involved, and in the middle of the chaos, Dre ended up slapping a man tied to Suge's crew. That slap became a line crossed. Within minutes, things spun out of control. Members of Suge's inner circle rushed into the studio, and what followed was an orchestrated act of retaliation. Dre was suddenly under attack, caught in a situation that escalated far beyond words. Shots were fired and he was hit in both legs. Snoop Dogg, who was reportedly beside him when it happened, would later acknowledge that the shooting was real.
There was a story that Dr. Dre, I think it was on the Breakfast Club recently, that he got shot
Yeah,
around the
and
time the
nobody
crime
knew
scene, and
nothing
nobody knew.
until Corrupt said something. We never said nothing. Corrupt wasn't even there. I was physically standing next to Dr. Dre when he got shot.
Wow.
We never said a word.
Look, man.
Wow.
We took that on the chin. He lived.
But in the world death row had become, silence was a survival tactic. The story was buried almost immediately. There were no police press conferences, no headlines, no lawsuits. Dre got medical help, but there was no public acknowledgement of what had really gone down. Everyone close to the situation knew how deep Suge Knight's influence ran, and no one wanted to risk making things worse. That moment was the breaking point. After everything he'd seen and endured, he made a choice that would reshape his future. Dre decided to leave death row entirely. He walked out the door and left behind his masters, his royalties, and years of work. That leap of faith became one of the boldest moves in music history. Freed from death row's dark cloud, Dre built something new, Aftermath Entertainment. It was more than a label, it was a rebirth. In the years that followed, Dre would help launch the careers of Eminem, 50 Cent, Kendrick Lamar, and many more. His production evolved, his vision expanded, and his empire grew, eventually leading to his billion-dollar partnership with Beats by Dre.
What y'all thinking about that, man? Crazy video, man. Assassination Tips. We out of here, though.